Hello, and welcome to Canyon Professional Development. During this session, we will be discussing instructional coaching and how to have those difficult conversations. My name is Carolyn Flora, and I'm the K-12 Special Projects Director. As we navigate through our session, I want you to consider what tools you will take away. When you identify tools or strategies that you want to implement right away, you're more likely to continue to implement them in order to help be successful when working with teachers in the classroom. We're going to start off with a quote. This quote was originally meant for athletes. However, it absolutely applies to instructional coaches as well. It says, "A great coach tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear." Oftentimes, as an instructional coach, you have come out of the classroom. You were a classroom teacher for many years, and you were used to working with students and having conversations with them. Now you're in this new role, perhaps, and you are supporting teachers who, in some instances, may have been teaching longer than you. And now you're deciding, how am I going to share with these individuals what they need to hear in order to grow as a teacher? And sometimes that's not exactly the easiest thing to do. When you're feeling like that, I want you to remember this quote, that a great coach isn't going to necessarily tell you what you want to hear, but instead what you need to hear. Because if we only tell people what they want to hear, we are really not doing them any justice or helping them grow. During this session, we are going to talk about some questioning skills you can use to provoke some critical and creative thinking. We're going to determine how to keep your coaching conversations student focused. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how to prepare for those difficult conversations, because that is very important. Just as a review, as an instructional coach, you wear many different hats. And going from data coach to motivator to mentor, sometimes in each of these roles, you have to have these difficult conversations. And what is that going to look like? I want you to begin to think about that. Remember, connection is so very important. We make connections every day, but when we are working closely with somebody and we're trying to gain their trust, it is imperative that you make those connections and build those relationships. It says the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from a relationship. That's what connection is. And that's what you need to have in order to be able to make a difference and to support teachers on their journey. And that was by Brene Brown. So I want you to take a second and I want you to think and reflect. What would you consider to be effective questioning? You can go back and you can think about your days as a student. Maybe you can think about your job as a professional. When your supervisors or your principals ask you different questions, or they have lead conversations with a group, what does effective questioning look like? Maybe you were a classroom teacher. What did effective questioning look like in the classroom when you were working with students? So take a second and think about that. If you need to stop the video at any point, feel free to do so, and then just hit play again when you're ready to move on. So let's dive into this. We have different types of questions, and we need to consider what each type of question does. So here we're going to start off with good questions. My guess is nobody would like to use or ask any questions that weren't at least considered good questions. Well, what do good questions do, especially in your role as an instructional coach? So, good questions are very purposeful. As an instructional coach, in order for any question to be meaningful, they have to be well thought out and very intentional. Good questions will help lead to clarity as you're working with teachers. Good questions will allow for exploration and elaboration. So, what does that mean? It means that when we ask questions, we're going to try to come up with questions that aren't only going to elicit a yes or no answer. They're going to be able to prompt us or the teacher to ask additional questions for further exploration or elaboration. Very important piece next, they're going to lead to action. Maybe the teacher is going to have to do some future research in order to come back and provide the information you have asked for. And that could be as simple as going into their curriculum and finding a section that might meet the needs of a particular student you've been talking about. Leads to the next point. It's going to have them perhaps examine available resources, things that they might not have ever taken time to look through. When I was an instructional coach and I would walk into classrooms, I would always do a walk around and sort of eyeball what was available to the teacher in that classroom. Oftentimes, I found that there were resources on their shelves or in their cupboards that they had no idea were there. Many teachers will move into a classroom that was occupied previously by another teacher, maybe somebody who had been there for a very long time. And as they're getting set up, they think, oh, I'm going to go through this stuff as time goes on. And that doesn't happen. But when that's the case, oftentimes they don't know about a lot of very valuable resources that they have available to them right there in their classroom. And last but not least, good questions identify barriers. So when you're discussing student performance, good questions are going to help teachers come up with their own answers to identify some barriers, some things that are preventing these particular students or the class from being as successful as they possibly can be. The next type of question I want to reflect on is a powerful question. This was always my goal as an instructional coach. We use a lot of good questions on a daily basis, but when I'm really having those one-on-one meetings after I've done some observations and we've built that relationship, I want to use these powerful questions. Powerful questions lead to an even higher level of reflection. Powerful questions prompt inquiry. Teachers begin to question their own practices based on the research that they've been introduced to, perhaps maybe some research you've done together, some ideas that you have shared. They start to dig deeper into the data to identify where students are having difficulties. Most importantly, powerful questions lead to action. Teachers move from thinking to doing. They begin to make positive, lasting changes in their teaching practices. I want you to think about each of these things. I don't think there's a single coach out there who would not be ecstatic to know that teachers are moving on to this higher level. Are you currently using powerful questions? If not, how can you start to do so? How can you begin to modify some of the questions that you're already asking to be more powerful, to cause teachers to begin to inquire more about what is going on with their students? How do we know it's a powerful question? This is sort of my favorite. We all know about the aha moment, that sudden insight, that shift in perspective that speaks to the heart. And as you work with teachers, I'm sure a lot of you have already even experienced it. Is so great when you're trying to have a discussion and you can tell that they're just not really buying in yet. And then all of a sudden, you ask that question or you share that information or that strategy and you see that light bulb go on and they realize, I can do that. That's when you know you've asked those powerful questions to begin that deeper level of thinking and helping them move forward. Which goes great with this quote. It is not the answer that enlightens, but the question, right? So if you are utilizing great, powerful questions, that's when teachers are going to begin to have those aha moments. So, what should these powerful questions sound like? So, what do questions look like in a coaching format? They're going to look a little different than if you and I were just having a conversation and we were asking each other questions. Now, of course, at the beginning, when you're building relationships, that's going to be much less formal and that normal day to day conversation. But when we get into the powerful questions, when we are trying to improve instruction that is taking place in the classroom, when we are trying to help students make that growth, we have to be very cognizant about the way we format our questions. Okay. So when getting started, you always want to consider, are you goal setting? Do your questions ultimately lead to the teacher you're working with coming up with some type of goal that they want to reach? Are you stating the desired outcome or the current state? This is really important because the last thing we want to do is sound discouraging. And if we're saying, well, right now, you know, your students aren't doing so well and these kids aren't on task, and we could go on forever. Instead, we want to form it in a question where we're talking about the desired state. So, we've decided that we would like to see 80% of your students at benchmark by the end of the quarter. What do you think might be our first steps in getting there? So I'm not dwelling on the negative, instead, I'm looking forward. What could you do to reach this goal? What will we do? How can I, as the coach, support you? I'm not only here to help you make a plan, but I'm here to help you implement that plan. So, coaching language includes clarifying questions. So we want to remember we are never going to assume. So if a teacher shares something with you and you're not 100% sure that you understand, or you think there might be more behind it, probe with more clarifying questions. Dig a little bit deeper. Another really important thing that you should be doing on a regular basis is paraphrasing questions, paraphrasing information that they've shared with you. So if the teacher asks you a question, before jumping right into the response, which we often want to do because we want to give answers, we want to paraphrase and share that question back to them. So, what I hear you asking me is, that's going to ensure you're answering the correct question and you're being very thoughtful and not just hopping in with a fix. Okay. So it's very important that we utilize these different types of questionings as we work with teachers. So are you prepared? What does being prepared look like? You've built the relationships, you've done the observations, you've met with the teacher multiple times, but now you're ready to really hop in and start helping the teacher make some changes. Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you're prepared for your coaching conversations. In the previous topics, you saw a video talking about observation notes. When you go into the classroom, you want to make sure that you are taking very detailed observation notes. What you see on the screen is a shot of what that looks like. These can be typed, these can be written. But what's so important is that you stick to what the topic at the top is asking for. What does the teacher say or do? What do the students say or do? We're not writing our opinions, we're stating the facts. We're sticking to the facts, what is going on. In the notes section, maybe there is where you're going to talk about what you think is working well or what you're wondering. We're once again not giving all the answers. We're stating what's working well and we're wondering. I'm wondering, why is it that you call each student up one by one to give them their binder? Right? We want to lead with questions. We want to stick to the facts. That is very important. In preparing for our coaching conversations, we need to focus on the students. We might be recording what the teacher says and does, but ultimately we're sharing that so that we can then focus on what the students say or do. What is their response to the teacher's action? The focus needs to stay on the students. When we keep the focus of our conversations on the students, it keeps those conversations safe for the teacher. As we think about focusing on the students and trying to be as empathetic in regard to what might be going on in the classroom, we need to have a really firm understanding of the difference between facts and interpretation. As you work with teachers and begin to have difficult conversations, it is critical that you recognize the difference between these two. During conversations, you must always stick to the facts. Stating the facts is less likely to be perceived as a personal attack. We are all human. Even though people might be trying to help us, it can feel very personal. But if we stick to the facts and we stay student focused, that is much less threatening. Teachers are more likely to be open minded when the conversation focuses on facts rather than what they are doing well or not so well in the classroom. Here we see some examples of what facts might be or what they might look like. Facts would be backed by evidence. They're true or false. There's no gray area. They're based upon an agreed upon standard. So maybe the school has determined that they want all third graders to be able to write a 5-sentence paragraph by the end of third grade. That would be an agreed upon standard that the school has set. Fact would be information ideas that are known to others, not something that is just a perception that you think or the teacher thinks. Versus interpretation, which is not backed by evidence. It's just something that somebody thinks based on what they've seen. Not necessarily true or false. Normally, we really consider interpretation somebody's opinion. And we know it's very dangerous to try to support somebody solely based on your opinion. That is going to come off as more of a personal attack. And interpretations, they're not known to others because it's just what somebody thinks. So when we're working with teachers, we want to stick to the facts. I would like you to pause the video for a couple of minutes to read over the statements included on the slide. You are going to determine if each statement is a fact or an interpretation. I want you to think about what you notice about the tone and the message of each of these statements and really what message they send, not just with their words, but in the way they might make somebody feel. So take a minute, pause the video, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, I hope you were able to reflect on each of the statements. I'd like to go through a couple of them, and I want you to think about what you came up with. So number 1 says, according to the results of the running record, Bobby is not currently reading at grade level. When you looked at that one, I hope you identified that this is a fact. This is a fact because you are not saying that somebody is doing something incorrectly. You're not talking about a personal trait. You are simply stating that based on a running record, which is an assessment, that this student is not currently, based on the standards, reading at grade level. This doesn't sound threatening, right? You're stating a fact. Versus number 2, I shouldn't have to take time out of my day to teach students how to behave. You might hear a teacher share a comment like this. And at that point, you're going to identify that's not a fact, right? It's an interpretation. What types of questions can I ask in order to, once again, come back to the facts? So a fact would be, I have to take 5 minutes out of my day to review the rules in order to ensure successful classroom management. That sounds way more positive and by no means is attacking the character of the students or the teacher. Next, we have my students just can't handle working in small groups. I hope you identified that that was definitely an interpretation. Number 4, since implementing weekly fluency checks, 90% of my students have made gains. Now, in this case, it's 90%. That's great. But even if this were 30%, it would still be okay. It would not be threatening because it is not talking about somebody personal in a personal way. Instead, it is talking about how students are achieving, and that is just a fact. Number 5, teaching math in the morning just won't work for me. Once again, I hope you identified that as an interpretation. Last but not least, we want to remember that we always need to start with the end in mind. What is the goal or outcome of having the conversation? One of the most important things to remember as a coach is that you want to enter a coaching conversation with a specific goal in mind. You don't necessarily have to share this goal with the teacher, but what it's going to do is help you keep the conversation moving in the right direction. It's going to help you remember what you want to do, where you want to lead the teacher to be most successful and to support his or her students to the best of their ability. As we round up this session, please think about what tools you will take away and how you're going to begin to implement them right away. And once again, a great coach tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Have a great day.